My name is Nancy Desmond. I'm with Cleveland Metro Parks, and I'm serving today as your host, not your presenter. We are in webinar mode, so you will not be able to interact with the presenters live, but you can put your questions into the Q&A, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. After the session, you will be provided a link to be put into a breakout room. And you can further discuss some of those questions in the breakout room. The presenters will not necessarily be in your breakout room. You'll be able to discuss the presentation without them. Okay, some housekeeping. As I mentioned, things like CEUs or the breakout rooms, those links will be provided in the chat. And you will also get a link to an evaluation at the end. If you are doing this for Parks and Recreation CEUs, you must fill out the survey after, and you must attend one of the breakout rooms. And then you will give your CEU paperwork back to me at the end. Okay, what else do I have to remember? I think that is everything on my plate at the moment. I'm going to turn it over to Senior Strategic Park Planner, Kelly Kaufman, my colleague at Cleveland Metro Parks, and she will introduce the rest of the panel.
Great. Well, good morning, Nancy. Good morning, everyone. We're really excited that you chose our session to attend and really look forward to conveying the process and the project for Cheers. Just a quick orientation. The project is located in Cleveland. With this graphic, you can see kind of downtown Cleveland off in the distance. This is actually the east side lakefront. There are some existing parks here, East 55th Marina, East 72nd. This is just kind of the edge of the Cleveland Lakefront Nature Preserve, just to kind of get us a little oriented as we get started. So introducing my fellow panelists, we're joined here by Freddie Collier Jr. He's the director of the Cleveland City Planning Commission, based here in Cleveland. Chris Shefton, who is Director of Real Estate Development for Famicos Foundation, again, working here in Cleveland. And Mary Morton, she's our project manager for our consultant team, and Mary is based in Philadelphia. So with this, I'm gonna pass it over to Director Collier, and he's gonna talk a little bit about just kind of the little history of the lakefront and how we got to this project.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you all people out there who are listening to this presentation. Want to talk a little bit about the journey, and I use the term journey because when we think about our waterfront, and you think about that 8-mile stretch, it is a journey, and it's a journey from west to east. And as we look back and we establish the vision for the waterfront, this is the implementation of that vision. And this Cheers process is very important to creating access and opportunities for people in our communities. Next slide, please. When you think about the 8-mile stretch of waterfront, we looked at 3 separate areas. And we looked at the eastern waterfront, which consists of assets like Gordon Park, Dyke 14. We looked at the western waterfront, which of course embraces Edgewater Park, and also our North Coast Harbor, our central, our core waterfront. And these geographies really define really where the true opportunities exist to capitalize on this God-given asset for our community. Next slide, please. One of the things that you'll notice about the waterfront district plan with respect to its priorities, one was linking neighborhoods. How do we get neighborhoods connecting to the water? And you'll hear a lot about that from Mary and the panelists today. Next slide. Another key piece is how do we master geography and leverage the geographic context that Cleveland sits in? Most of our shoreline sits beneath our mainland and creates great opportunities for great view sheds. Next slide. Another key principle is how do we leverage and develop our parks and also extend our parks out into the water, which you'll see a little bit of in the presentation. Next slide, please. And one of the most important aspects of the waterfront district plan was the principle around accessible public spaces. And the key word there is accessible. We have to overcome many barriers that were man-made. And in part, what Cheers in this effort is doing is helping us to course correct from some of the historic errors that have been made with respect to the interface between land and water. How do we reclaim that? Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about what we did in the West. Next slide. To overcome some of those barriers and create those connections, we had to really rethink about how we started to punch through these man-made barriers, such as railroad tracks, et cetera. Next slide. So beginning to take advantage of linkages that we can create opportunities to access things like Edgewater Park and really make it a pedestrian connection, looking at things like West 73rd Street. Next slide. These are some examples of some earlier renditions of what that connection would look like if you were to punch through underneath the tracks, and you will also create opportunities to overcome the West Shoreway. Next slide, please. The result of creating those infrastructure improvements, one key example is Edgewater Park. And many of you have witnessed the amazing beach house that the Metro Parks implemented. And it now is an asset that actually really draws the neighborhood to the water. Next slide, please. And also neighborhood improvements have resulted. When you start to make land opportunities available, create connections to natural assets, these are the results. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at our harbor front or downtown development. When we look at our core waterfront, and how do you begin to first, next slide, connect the downtown grid to our water and make that seamless. So in each one of these sections, we're overcoming hurdles. Next slide. So first step in that process was improving the malls. You all know that we've made significant investments in Public Square. We also made significant investments in the malls, and we seek to further connect those. Next slide. As you have recently witnessed with the lakefront connector, this is an example of how we are achieving the goal and envisioning an opportunity to create a seamless interface between our inland neighborhoods, our downtown neighborhoods, so that people can connect and reclaim their relationship with the water. Next slide. These are some other examples of investments that have happened along the waterfront. Again, not just creating public space, but also activating our waterfront. Next slide, please. Now, as we move east, we start to really look at the true neighborhood opportunities. And the Eastern development opportunities create a tremendous, tremendous opportunity to connect the unconnected. Many of the neighborhoods that are south of here, if you were not from Cleveland and you were riding down the street just parallel, you would not know you were in a lakefront community. So how do we begin to reestablish that connection? Next slide, please. One of those connections exists via rail lines. How do we use these north-south streets to create investment opportunities, taking advantage of the connection that exists from our downtown, our river valley, which is our other waterfront, out to these areas that will create access for people, not just through the neighborhood, but by utilizing public transportation. Next slide, please. And also, how can bicyclists and pedestrians connect to this area? We see tremendous opportunities to implement this East Side connector that would connect residents from our core city out east to some of the assets that you're going to be introduced to today. Next slide. And I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the key developments that are happening. The more investments that we make, the more human capital we have on our waterfronts, people living, working, biking, experiencing our water on a day-to-day basis. This is key with respect to what you're going to see today. And the amenity that is created as a result of the Cheers effort, we believe will help draw those potential residents, will help draw those potential visitors to not only come and experience our city, but actually live in our city. The shoreline development is one example of that. Next slide, please. And other developments along East 55th Street. That's really going to create an opportunity for people, not just in the city, but in the entire region to experience what you're going to see today. Next slide, please. So this area that we're talking about is one that was envisioned to be one where connections are made, amenities are created from literally nothing, which is something you're going to see today in this presentation. And we seek to create opportunities in neighborhoods to connect our residents back to the water, to protect habitat, and to create true opportunities so that residents can really touch and experience God's asset that he's given to this community. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelly. She's going to talk to you about this specific opportunity at this specific time that we see us taking advantage of and creating what the Waterfront District Plan envisioned. Thank you. Kelly?
Thanks, Freddie. That was a great introduction and really, shows a lot of the potential along the lakefront. So this is an image from the east side lakefront today. Maybe not the most welcoming weather, but we're really working hard to make Cleveland a four-season city. So a little bit about the conditions in the existing project area. There are some challenges. A lot of this area has heavy duty rock shore protection, steel break walls, just kind of a lot of just, water, lawn, parking lots, not a lot of in between. We see tremendous impact from the lake. This project site is east of the kind of the terminus of the federal break wall. So the image that you see here is not an uncommon occurrence, with waves crashing onto the land and along the adjacent I-90 interstate. A lack of community access, as Freddie pointed out, we have a lot of neighborhoods adjacent that we really want to feel that they are truly lakefront neighborhoods. And then again, just that wave action, storms and ice. And so, what's kind of driving this work? Well, we really have a vision that we can create a lot of space for additional habitat. It's also important that we were able to locate places for the beneficial reuse of dredge material. As most Clevelanders know, dredging the federal shipping channel is an important economic driver for us locally. And then making sure that we're improving access and lakefront conditions. And then, as Freddie touched on so well, spurring new and equitable development. So the study area, this is kind of an aerial view to orient folks again. Downtown is kind of to the right side of your screen. There's Burke Lakefront Airport, Interstate 90 kind of along that northern edge. And then you see the pockets of park space with East 55th Marina, East 72nd, and the Cleveland Lakefront Nature Preserve. So with those kind of potential opportunities along this stretch of the lakefront, we were able to form a partnership. It's a partnership right now of 5 entities who are participating equally. The City of Cleveland, Cleveland Metro Parks, along with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, the Ohio Department of Transportation, and the Port of Cleveland. So the vision for Cheers is really, let's look at this stretch of the lakefront. And by the way, Cheers is just an acronym to kind of shorten the Cleveland Harbor Eastern Embayment Resilience Study, because that's definitely a mouthful. But looking at how we can take this resource and build upon it to make it just kind of the foundation of a resilient neighborhood. Crucial part of this project is not only the 5 partners, but engaging with multiple stakeholders, working with agencies, also conducting work in the area. There's a lot of important community improvement work going on, and also stakeholders who are maybe more grassroots or smaller organizations that also have, share in this part of the vision for the lakefront. And so what our work has really been able to do is generate kind of these more specific goals of the 5 partners, with a lot of overlap, a lot of shared goals, but listening to the community and making sure that the project is really driven by the input we're receiving from residents. We're working as hard as we can to really hear from those local residents. And then for that point, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Shefton, working with the Community Development Corporation Famicos Foundation. And we've really appreciated Chris's work. And she's going to walk us through a little bit of the public engagement efforts that have occurred. So Chris, I'll pass it to you.
Good morning, everybody. As Kelly mentioned, my name is Chris Shefton. I'm the Director of Real Estate Development for Famicos Foundation. Famicos serves in the city of Cleveland as a community development corporation, one of many, but we service 3 neighborhoods on the east side of Cleveland: Glenville, Huff, and St. Clair Superior. And so it is very much within our wheelhouse to have great concern about the use for the Eastern Lakefront. It very much impacts our neighborhoods and communities in the future that we hope that they will have. And so just building off of the great presentation so far by Director Collier and Kelly, let's jump right in just to kind of talk about the engagement process. And so, as you can see here, our original plans, or how things started, were quickly derailed by that thing called COVID. And so what we thought was going to be a pretty straightforward traditional community engagement process quickly went off the rails. And so, but with all good things, and I think particularly as it applies to community, hard times call for ingenious efforts. And so I think that the team really took a step back and paused to say, how can we best serve? No, that's fine. How can we best serve the residents, still get that feedback while doing it in a way that's safe for everyone? And so we did that by combining the Zoom process with social distance, in person, physical, interactive experiences. Next slide. And so, the thing that is difficult, I think, as it applies to something like the lake, or working even with a stellar organization like the Metro Parks, is that they're regional. They have regional appeal. There are people across Northeast Ohio who have a vested interest in their success. And so you're not going to, in a traditional process like this one, necessarily get to the hyper local aspect that we were attempting to get through it's weird to say social media is traditional, but through the traditional means and methods of using social media, particularly in a neighborhood or neighborhoods like St. Clair Superior and Glenville that are digitally redlined. And so we had these tools at our disposal in terms of websites and social media and streaming meetings. And they made for a really interesting and our first docs experience was at one of these community meetings. And so it made for an interesting opportunity for us to sort of learn on the go, be quick on our feet, and be able to pivot using these tools and others. Next slide. But I think the real experience to be lifted up through the interactions were the workshops. And so one of the ingenious ideas that was introduced into this process was getting out to the lakefront and having physical experiences. Yes, safe, social distance outside, but really getting people down to the lakefront, particularly for those who live in the neighborhoods most adjacent to where these improvements will be made. There is so much community trauma as it applies to green spaces across the country, not just in places like Cleveland, where people of color have had or heard of prior bad experiences that people that they love or residents or neighbors have had in a particular green space, and they therefore don't feel a connection, A, or B, that that's a part of their neighborhood, that it belongs to them and it really belongs to other people. And so this experience allowed for residents to be able to really get out to the lake, which, you know, figuring that somebody would live 5 minutes away, they would spend tons of time there. But this was really an opportunity to engage folks in something that, despite how close they live, they might not have spent a lot of time interacting with in the past. In addition to that, you know, just getting out into the neighborhood and meeting residents where they are at traditional events and things that were already happening, including food distribution, which was huge for us in 2020. And so really created some opportunities to be able to interact directly with residents and ask them what their concerns are. And then lastly, we did some really creative things with flyers and cards, making them interactive so that they were art opportunities for kids so that they would have opportunities to color them, while also providing information to parents about what was happening on the lakefront. Next slide. So the youth aspect of this was huge for us. You know, I think from a planning perspective, planners don't always take into consideration that high school students will soon be the next level of constituents, right? The next ones who are providing feedback at these meetings. And so engaging with them engaging with them directly and making it a very intentional effort was huge for us. But it's also, again, creating those interactive experiences and ensuring that the next generation of residents don't have that same trauma as it applies to our green spaces and lake. Next slide. Right. So I think that the best part of these workshops was how diverse they were. And that doesn't just mean from a perspective of race, but a perspective of families, a perspective of age, a perspective of race, yes, but then also a diversity in the places that these folks came from. So there were folks that came from the direct neighborhood, which was our true focus, but we also had that regional aspect as well, in terms of folks that were coming from other parts of Northeast Ohio to share their experience, and give them also a different viewpoint. I think the really important part here was to make sure that individuals had the opportunities to interact with one another and have conversation, so that folks who are regional have the opportunity to see, yeah, like folks live here, like there are houses over there, and they're directly impacted by the things that happen here on the lake. And to really be able to understand the perspective and both sides of that, I think was hugely helpful for everybody. Next slide. So the first, as I mentioned, our first sort of tranche of community engagement was really focused in a digital way, and really trying to get an understanding of what residents are looking for out of an experience on the Eastern Lakefront, and really attempting to build upon the great work that the city of Cleveland and the other stakeholders have been planning around for ever, in terms of what the next steps are for the lakefront. And so this was really us attempting to use the knowledge and information of what we already have and enhancing that with the experiences of the residents and or stakeholders in terms of what they want to see for the future. Next slide. And then from there, we use these interactive experiences to really get folks out on the lake and get their feedback in terms of what they'd like to see, what things you'd like to do. And I mean, a lot of it is the traditional sort of, yes, we need bathrooms, and yes, we want areas to have a picnic, or we want an opportunity to grill. But it was also like, folks really fish down here, and there are active fishermen that are down here all the time. How do we create space for those individuals, so that's not lost. There is a historic yacht club that actually sits on a portion of the lakefront as well. What are their experiences and how can we incorporate the things that they're doing in terms of their community outreach into the next iteration of what this looks like? And so it's just really important for us to be able to, again, get this diverse group of individuals together and hear the things that they have to say in terms of how they engage with the lake today and how they want to engage with it for the future. Next slide. And then from there, again, we used digital experiences to, now we've collected all this feedback. We've heard what you've had to say. We've incorporated a lot of the feedback from previous iterations of planning. This is what we think we heard you say. Is this it? Have we really hit the nail on the head in terms of using your voice and elevating it in such a way that these are the experiences that you really feel like embody that and allow you to really get the experiences on the lake that you would like. Next slide. And so now we're refining, right? We're continuing to soften the sharp edges and really bring this plan to life. It's also requiring us to sort of pivot and think about new ways for us to engage, because as things open back up in the world, what are our next steps in terms of what are the spaces in the neighborhood that residents use that we can, you know, co-locate and continue to gather that feedback from them in ways that's natural and it doesn't feel forced. You know, there's nothing more that residents hate, despite how much we planners love that, is to give them some markers and some Post-it notes and tell them to write things down. And so it really requires and has challenged us to think outside the box in terms of ways for residents to be able to provide this feedback in ways that they can be excited about and they can really see themselves in the planning and really be excited about the future. And next slide. And so, like I said, we're continuing to refine these approaches and really look at, you know, how are the things that we're planning to do, really, how do they benefit the residents of the community? And I think that's a pivot in terms of how planners and how planning works today, right? That this isn't necessarily starting or prioritizing the experiences of those stakeholders from across the region. This is really starting from a hyper-local approach and saying, actually, what we want is we want to elevate the voice of these residents who've lived in these communities for decades and have that be what we lead with. That's the feedback that we think is most important. And from the perspective of, you know, somebody might ask, well, why would you as a director of real estate be so focused in an effort like this one? For me and for my organization, what this does or what it has the potential to do is to help to support the property value of those individuals that are living adjacent to the lake. So, you know, depending on which planner or which economist you listen to, you could be an increase in terms of individuals who live adjacent to green space of 5 to 20% on your property value just by being adjacent to a park. And so Black and Brown communities often don't see those benefits. And so how can we, using this plan, ensure that residents are actually able to see the benefits of this planning work, not just living close to it, but yes, able to use it, experience it, but then also being able to get the direct benefit in their property value. Next slide. So turning it over to Mary.
Thanks, Chris. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how that community feedback that Chris really focused on and the engagement really directly shaped the resilience plan for the future of the Eastern Lakefront. Next slide. So throughout the process, we really look to frame resiliency through three lenses: the environment, the economy, and the community. These three legs of resiliency were especially important for the Eastern Lakefront, as the area is not only an essential natural and cultural asset for adjacent neighborhoods and the city and region at large, but it also sits at this intersection of social and economic vulnerability and hazards associated with climate change. So we really focus on how do we make improvements and how do we create strategies that would enhance the lakefront and the adjacent community's ability to survive, adapt, and grow in the face of these economic, social, and environmental challenges that we're looking at in the future. Next slide. So for the lakefront, this really meant that we needed to bring the needs of the lake, the community, and natural systems into balance to create this healthier community and ecosystem. Next slide. And this played out in the plan by creating nature-based solutions that provide multiple benefits to the community, nature, and the lake. So the goals, the kind of overarching goals for the project, and the idea was really to connect people and communities to the lake, program spaces that meet the needs of the community, protect natural systems that enhance the well-being of the lake and surrounding communities, and celebrate the legacy, history, and significance of the lake. Next. So the plan for Cheers really envisions returning this hardened edge of the east side lakefront into a natural shoreline with places for both people and nature. Next. The beneficial use of dredge expands parks and habitats north of I-90, creating over 80 acres of new community park space. That also mitigates the impact of the highway on existing infrastructure and parks and creates a sheltered cove where visitors can safely access the lake. Swaths of reforestation, new wetland and marsh habitats, and naturalized shoreline are encircled by a comprehensive network of trails and tree-lined parkways that connect neighborhoods to the lakefront. Playgrounds, restrooms, picnic lawns, overlooks, and concession areas are distributed throughout the lakefront to enhance the visitor experience. New gateways, expanded event lawns, and increased educational and natural programming will activate the edges of the area, while the protected cove, wetlands, reforestation, meadows, and marsh areas provide an immersive natural experience in the heart of the city. Next. And what these spaces really allow us to do is allow the shoreline to adapt while preserving habitat, create a buffer to protect that critical infrastructure, and provide more spaces for the community to enjoy nature and the lake. And all of these really incorporate those top rated goals that you can see on the side of the screen that were voted on by the community through that process that Chris described. Next. We also made sure that we were incorporating those top projects from the engagement session. So these were really shaped by that community feedback of what people wanted to see along the lakefront. This includes the protected cove where people can walk down into the water and have more of an actual connection with the water, whereas now they just kind of can stand along the edge and look at it. As well as multiple trail experiences, including multi-use trails, nature trails, and boardwalk trails, as well as greenways that extend open space back into the community, lawn spaces for picnicking, a shore for wading, and an offshore island that allows for the creation of this really protected cove. Next. So Kelly touched on this a bit, but I'm going to talk about how kind of the plan meets some of these larger goals from a citywide perspective, nature, access, and community. So from the city's perspective, it helps store up to 3 million cubic yards of dredge material. So this is material that needs to go somewhere, right? So this is material that's dredged every year, and this provides a great opportunity to use that material in a way that really connects residents to the lakefront. It also protects I-90 and improves safety for ODOT. So the waves lapping over the highway have been a safety issue for a very long time. So this provides a clear buffer that really helps remove that issue. And it provides equity and recreation amenities and really supports tourism and economic development for the community. It also enhances nature with new natural areas, aquatic restoration and improved water quality, and over 6,000 linear feet of softened shoreline. And from an access perspective, it provides not only a diversity of trail experience, but also strengthens those existing neighborhood connections to allow for greater access to the communities. And then from the community's perspective, it allows those places for folks to really engage holistically with the water and provides a number of passive and flexible recreation space that really builds upon what people already love about the lakefront. Next. So the plan itself is organized in sort of 3 main components. So the isle is the offshore island that you see in this image that's really situated offshore to provide protection, but also a whole new way to experience the lakefront, being further out in the water. The lakeshore extends the existing shoreline, creating a welcoming connected park space that interfaces with adjacent communities. Major gateways at 72nd Street, East 55th Marina, MLK Drive, and a new pedestrian bridge adjacent to the former First Energy plant provide connections to the lakefront with existing neighborhoods like St. Clair Superior and Glenville, as well as Huff. These gateways not only provide a safe and accessible connection for pedestrians and bicyclists, but they also serve as trailheads, strengthening the existing local and regional trail system. The lakeshore also leverages existing activity nodes at 55th Street Marina and North Gordon Park, where folks already enjoy to fish, creating a new gathering recreation space to serve the community. The Cove is then nestled between the two, providing those spaces for habitat restoration and water-based recreation in a protected area. Next. So the planned systems of community, nature, water, and circulation really help adapt to the changing needs of the surrounding communities and the environment. Together, these systems work to bolster the quality of the natural environment, physical and mental well-being, safety, and Cleveland's economic development and tourism. Next. A variety of community serving spaces line the lakefront and the Isle. This includes visitor amenities like concessions and restrooms, play spaces, and water recreation, including kayaking and fishing, as well as viewing and scenic areas where community members can take in expansive views of the city. And then those flexible lawn and picnic areas for passive and active recreation that also allow for immersive natural experiences. Next. The plan includes a variety of trail types to serve multiple user groups, from multi-use paved trails for biking, walking, and running, nature trails that meander through new wetlands, marshes, and habitat spaces, and boardwalk trails that extend over the water of the Cove. All of these trails connect back to those existing regional and local trails like the Lake Erie Water Trail and the Cleveland Lakefront Bikeway that Director Collier talked about earlier. Next. Then from the vehicle perspective, with the expansion of the parkland adjacent to I-90, it allows for the extension of Marginal Drive, which is now called Lakeshore Drive. So right now you have to actually hop on the highway to get from one side of the lakefront to the other. So this allows a more seamless connection and a parkway that really connects those parks. Parking lots and vehicular circulation are also hung off of that main drive, which improves the whole experience of someone enjoying the lakefront. Also, by improving the frequency of the existing RTA route and providing a shuttle or microtransit loop that brings folks out onto the Isle will help reduce dependence on cars for the long term. Next. The creation of an offshore isle, as I mentioned before, allows for the softening or semi-softening of the interior of the Cove. So you can see in this diagram the direction of wave forces that are quite intense. The areas in red and orange represent an intensity of wave action, which necessitates larger stone and protection structures, while areas in green and yellow represent areas where the shoreline can be softened. Next. The protection provided by the Isle also allows for expansive new habitat areas and natural areas, both in water and on the shore. Next. So I'm going to quickly walk through some of the experiences or rooms of the plan that were really animated by this community input. Next. So this graphic highlights the rooms we'll be walking through, from the Gordon Hills at the end of East 72nd to the Habitat Loop, the launch and the shore, the Eastern Fishing Cove adjacent to the existing node of activity at 55th Street Marina, and the lawn located on the Isle. Next. So situated at the terminus of East 72nd Street, the Gordon Hills rise over 35 feet above the existing lakefront, giving visitors stunning views of the shoreline, Lake Erie, and the Cleveland skyline. The Gordon Hills also provide a year-round node of activity, changing with each season, offering sledding in the winter, leaf peeping in the fall, and meadow wildflowers in the spring, as well as a prime firework and air show viewing destination in the summer. Next. Moving on to the Habitat Loop, which is located north of that current pinch point between I-90 and the lakefront that Kelly talked about. Here, trails meander along and loop through naturalized shoreline that includes marsh areas and wetland habitat. The trail connects the existing park spaces and new habitat areas, providing space for nature lovers, birders, and walkers to enjoy. Visitors to the Habitat Loop will find a series of nature and boardwalk trails that loop through wetland and shrub habitat. Next. The shore provides a new water-based experience along the eastern lakefront that many community members requested throughout the process. The creation of land from dredged material creates a safe place for visitors to wade and walk down into the water. This new amenity gives Eastsiders a place to touch and directly interact with the water and a protected and calm cove. The launch responds to the community's desire to have more spaces for water sports, in particular places for visitors to rent and learn how to operate watercraft like kayaks, paddleboards, and canoes. The launch includes both an accessible slope deck and a naturalized shoreline area to launch watercraft, and an adjacent building with a pavilion provides a location for renting equipment, accessing restrooms, and purchasing concessions. Next. The Eastern Fishing Cove builds off of the existing node of fishing activity at East 55th and responds to a desire for more places to fish, areas where folks can be closer to the water, and more viewing and observation areas to take in the picturesque views of Lake Erie and downtown Cleveland. Located adjacent to flexible lawn and event spaces, fishing amenities, and restrooms, creates a node of intergenerational activity where families can spend the day fishing, picnicking, and enjoying views of the water. Next. And then finally, the Isle. So this is a place where visitors can walk or bike across the bridge or paddle out through the cove and wander through vegetated trails, tree-lined lawns, and nature play areas, immersing themselves in the unique natural environment of Lake Erie. Created from dredged material, this barrier island provides protection for the shoreline, allowing the creation of a protected cove and softening of the shoreline. Next. And then touching again, just to end on those gateways and community greenways. So the 72nd Street Gateway becomes one of the key gateways into the park spaces, providing an essential link to communities with wayfinding, visitor amenities, and gathering spaces. Next. And the community greenways really envisions a series of green neighborhood connections that extend park spaces from the lakefront back to adjacent neighborhoods along existing streets. Next. These greenways or green fingers include necessary safety improvements for pedestrians and bicyclists and new planting and street trees. Smaller vacant lots located along these streets create a potential for a string of pocket parks along the greenways. Next. While each of these street segments will undergo further planning and design work through the ongoing Safe Routes to Parks initiative, we also looked at them through the Cheers process to think about what the vision could be for the future and really focus on those potential improvements. So this really envisions the implementation of the city's Midway Cycle Track Improvement Plan along East 55th, where a landscape buffered central bike lane provides for greater bike access, while a wide multi-use trail segment along the north and south lanes provides for pedestrian access. And then for East 72nd, we reimagined that as a greenway with buffered bike lanes and a multi-use trail, as well as art planting and wayfinding in the current concrete median. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Kelly to talk about implementation and ongoing engagement.
Great, thanks so much, Mary. Yeah, so we are drawing to a close with the initial design phase for Cheers, but as you'll see, you know, the outgrowth of the project and kind of the relationships with other community efforts is just really starting to build. So one of those efforts is called Safe Routes to Parks. It's a grant that was obtained by Bike Cleveland, and it's really focused on details about East 55th and East 72nd and working out education and, again, that community connection. So that's another great example of partnership. Just recently, we had a ribbon cutting at East 72nd for a new comfort station that's really a great trailhead along the Cleveland Lakefront Bikeway. Bike racks, benches, signage, restrooms, water, and we'll be following up with a bike fix-it station. But again, that just makes the existing lakefront parks that much better to enjoy and to visit with families. Later this summer, we'll be having the ribbon cutting for the Lake Erie Water Trail. And then ongoing engagement. We're really looking forward to some events in the parks this summer. We've been working with Famicos, Ingenuity Cleveland, and other partners to do some pop-up events. And we're also really pleased to announce that Black Environmental Leaders, a statewide nonprofit, has joined the original 5 partners for the next phases of Cheers. So we are applying for funding to help further detail the design. We're really excited about opportunities to share the work and to get more people involved, like today. And we've had a number of conversations about, you know, how do we get this from a really exciting plan to implementation, because I think that's what's so important to all the partners. And so we've been talking about, you know, a potential phase 1, phase 2, and really kind of honing in on an initial project that'll serve as kind of a proof of concept that'll show if we have kind of that hardened outer edge, does that really allow us to have the softened habitat, really get people closer to touching the water. It protects infrastructure. And so it's kind of a, you know, just a great example of what the entire project can achieve, but fast tracking that to construction. And then just kind of to help people visualize too, this isn't our exact project area, it's another location along Lake Erie, but what the transition can be from a steel bulkhead to a natural shoreline. And I think that just, it just shows those layers of benefits. It's not only more beautiful, it's fish spawning, it's more usable space. So that's just, another quick snapshot. So with that, we really wanted to open things up and hear from attendees and do a little Q&A. So I think we've got 10 or 15 minutes, and would love to just, hear what people are curious to learn more about.
Kelly, I have some questions in the Q&A, and I'll read them to you.
Great.
One interesting question is, does this plan does it consider the potential for rising lake levels due to climate change?
Yes, I know one of the consultant partners, KS Associates, did do an analysis. Mary, I don't know if you want to speak to that in more detail.
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. So our partner KS Associates, they have a lot of experience working in and around the Great Lakes region, specifically related to improvements like this. And one of the things that we did very early on was set a design height, essentially. So in addition to looking at wave action throughout the study area at a high level, we also looked at what those future lake levels might look like. So everything that is kind of designed in the conceptual plan is based on that potential for those higher lake levels. It's a great question.
Thank you. There's a couple questions that are sort of related to each other regarding ongoing management of the park. I believe Cleveland Metro Parks will be managing it, Kelly, yes. There's questions about plans to engage outside groups to host activities, to engage people nearby, or if we have plans to do that. I think it might be a little early for us yet, but we do have an entire education staff. Maybe you can speak to that, Kelly.
Sure, yeah. I think the underlying story of the whole Cheers initiative is just partnerships and community relationships, and we would definitely expect that to continue and to build. I'll use even this summer as an example that while we are planning these pop-up events, those are in partnership with Chris and Famicos. They're in partnership with Ingenuity, a neighborhood arts organization. They're in partnership with Cleveland Foundation and Common Ground. Kirtland Bird Club has offered to lead some tours. Inner City Yacht Club is going to open their doors. So I think we all need to work together. And so, yes, I think that's the intent, and to see, how the project can grow and how we can involve as many people as possible.
Have there been any discussions on facilities suitable for local school groups, or how schools may engage with the space?
I'll start, and then if Mary or Chris want to join in. We have, talked with some school groups and birding groups. We haven't gotten to that specific level of design yet, but that is something we would look to continue. And just even the Safe Routes to Parks effort is working directly with I think it's Wilson Elementary. Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, definitely, as Chris mentioned, the youth aspect is super important.
Yeah, I think, oh, Chris, go ahead.
In this particular geography, there's quite a few schools, which is interesting in Cleveland's portfolio model. St. Martin de Porres is a high school, Wilson School, which was already mentioned, and then there's the combined Montessori School of Stonebrook and Michael R. White, which is on the east side of Rockefeller Park. And so those are just a few of the schools, but there's a lot of opportunities given where these schools are situated, being right off of Rockefeller Park, which connects directly to the lake, to really create interesting experiences. The Cultural Gardens Federation, which is one of the stewards in Rockefeller Park, is also in process right now of attempting to put together specific materials in terms of curriculum that can be shared with teachers so that they can have experiences, green and otherwise, both in Rockefeller Park and at the lake. So I think that's really an exciting opportunity on the youth front in terms of interaction.
Yeah, I think just to kind of build on that, one of the groups, if you saw the photos in the workshop, they're called the Bird Nerds, and they're from the East Clark Elementary School. And I think one of the great things about that workshop with them is really understanding how youth experience the lakefront very differently from, other folks who are involved in the workshops, and particularly youth of color. And I think that's something that, I think we touched on it before, but one of the challenges with doing engagement during COVID was that it was really hard to reach a lot of these folks. I mean, schools weren't in session, everything was being done virtually. So one of the things that the team really wants to focus on, I think the partners have really made a great commitment to this, is continuing engagement through the next processes. So this is not a plan that's set in stone and, may not necessarily be implemented exactly as we're showing in the renderings, but it gives you an idea of what those spaces are and what the potential programming are. But we really want to make sure that we're connecting to the community and understanding specifically what they're looking for in these spaces as we move into those next steps of implementation and design.
I've got a couple more questions. We have a little bit more time. Was there any consideration given to, as you developed the Cove, the plan for the Cove, was there any consideration about the depth of the water there, or reducing the depth of the water in the Cove?
I'm really missing Mark from KS right now, my engineering partner on this. Yeah, so we had a lot of discussions about the Cove. There were some considerations, and I'll let Kelly build on this as well. We wanted to provide places for folks to touch and engage with the water because that was something they really wanted to do, but we also wanted to make sure that folks could do it safely. So the specific area directly adjacent to the shore would include some infill of dredge material to create a shallower area for folks to wade into the water, not swim, but wade. And then the rest of the Cove would really be used for water sports like kayaking and canoeing. So we're not imagining that anyone is swimming through the Cove to the Isle. So that was a key consideration because we do know that the water depths are pretty deep there. Also, as part of, this gets a little more technical, but as part of the creation of the Isle, there would be almost a pyramiding up to get there. So the way that you kind of lay the dredge material, it's not just straight down. So there would be some lowering of the lake levels as you slope into the Cove. Kelly, I don't know if you want to touch on anything else there from an operations standpoint.
No, I think it's a good question. And, we're really building off past decisions along this part of the lakefront. And the past decision was already to build out to create the shelf for I-90. So we're really doing our best to soften that shore and make it safe for people. But, a wholesale filling of the area within the Cove was not really part of the plan. So.
Another question here has popped up. Also, I'll point out that someone has provided a bunch of links. Brian Gibbons, thank you, related to the project or other examples, particularly about gentrification, which came up in our last session too. Another question here in the Q&A, how was the high school students' work evaluated and used in the plan?
The East Clark bird nerds participated in a workshop, and kind of the standard workshop material. We had some great maps, and we just encourage people to kind of draw on them or note input, and having kind of those one-on-one conversations that having the smaller group really helped facilitate. That's really how the input was more directly plugged into the plan. We have had representation from St. Martin de Porres as part of our stakeholder group. And so, as Mary and Chris have said, this process is just going to continue and to grow. And so we hope to build on that. And I think that's an area where we have an opportunity, that more feedback is just always our goal.
I would say one of the specific areas that their input really influenced the more physical plan, and also some of the things we were thinking about from a programming perspective was how do we make spaces, particularly nature-based recreation spaces, more welcoming to folks from the community, and particularly kids who might be interested in this but may not know how to access it or know how to get into it, and making sure that, one of the things they told us in that process was, they joined us on the Cleveland Lakefront Nature Preserve, and they had been there before, but they felt that the entrance was not very welcoming. It didn't feel like they were supposed to be there, right? It didn't feel like it was something if they were alone that they would want to walk into. So really thinking about how do we use signage and wayfinding and environmental graphics to make sure that people feel really welcome in these spaces and that it's clear that they are to be used by that community, not just by, you know, folks who might be, you know, lifelong birders coming from regional areas.
And I just also want to jump in really quick to say, just in the comments as it applies to gentrification, that all things require balance. And so gentrification in its like most basic definition essentially means folks with income moving into a community. What we want to we want that. We want it a lot, actually. What we want to be careful of is displacement. What we want to be careful of is, you know, landlords jacking up rent just because these amenities come into place. And so it's really about, somebody asked earlier about my involvement from a real estate perspective. And I think that Famiko's being involved very active and very early in this process helps to ensure that we can work with folks like the council person to legislate, to figure out different policies that need to be put in place in order to ensure that those sorts of things don't happen. So it's about how do we create or invite new individuals in without displacing those individuals who've always been there.
I'm going to jump in to let you know that we have less than 3 minutes, and then we will all, the session will end. And I want to remind you that you can check the chat for a link to the breakout rooms for further discussion. You'll be sorted out into smaller groups and put in the breakout rooms. One more question, if you have time to answer this. There's something called the Opportunity Corridor happening in Cleveland right now, another plan, and will it connect to that for a pedestrian or bike connection?
I think generally speaking, Opportunity Corridor will connect to the Harrison Dillard, the existing multi-purpose trail along Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard through Rockefeller Park. And that in turn connects with the existing Cleveland Lakefront Bikeway. But I think there are always opportunities to build off those spines and make more connections. Chris, I don't want to, if you know more detail or,
No,
or have other.
That's 100% the answer, that it
Great.
will connect into the Harrison Dillard Trail.
Wonderful. And just kind of in our final moments, I do want to, Director Collier, sent his regrets that he had to step off the presentation a little early, but he did want to make sure that everybody in the presentation is aware that there's a ribbon cutting tomorrow for the Towpath Trail Stage 4. It's at 2 p.m. So I'm not sure if that's covered in other, conference materials, but Director Collier just asked that I mention that to folks.
Well, we're less than a minute now, so I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists. You guys did a great job. It's a really interesting project. Thanks for all the good questions, and hopefully we'll see some of the participants in the breakout rooms.